episode of The Conversation of Our Generation. My name is Nick Jamel, the creator of The Conversation of Our Generation, where we are solving the problems of today with the wisdom of the past. And today we will be doing a book review on some of the shocking secrets of American history by Bill Coate. And I love this book. I think it was a really, really fun read. It was just interesting to learn. I'm kind of a history guy, so that might make me a little partial to it. But regardless, I think it's just a really great way to pick up some tidbits of history that might really bring people who may not like history as much into it. I think if you think of history as dates and your boring history teacher in high school, this will change your mind quite a bit. I wanted to do this in keeping with this week's episode on Catholic history myths and some of the stuff there. So I decided to bring out another history book just to keep with the theme. And if you haven't listened to Tuesday's episode, definitely go back and check that out. But in this episode, we'll look at some of the secrets of history that are in this book, actually, kind of not in depth because we don't have time in the book reviews, but a quick one. And why I think it's important to know more about history, even if you're not necessarily the big history buff. And I know that I definitely have plenty more to learn about history as much as I enjoy it. But I just want to remind you as well before we hop into the quote that you can find me on conversationforourgeneration.com. If you go to the podcast tab, just conversationforourgeneration.com/podcast, you can find it anywhere there, or just wherever you listen to your podcast. Search it and find it, and you'll be able to subscribe, leave a good rating and review there. That helps me out as well with spreading this and getting more people to learn about it. It makes it easier to have some of the interesting conversations that we've had over the last few weeks, for sure. So actually, really, a couple months almost, it seems like. So definitely do that and check that out, and go to Twitter at @ConOfOurGen to follow me on that, or Facebook.com/ConversationForOurGeneration. I recommend following there to keep up with everything that's going on. And you can also let me know if you have guests or if you want to be a guest on the Conversation for Our Generation on the contact form, just conversationforourgeneration.com/contact. And with that, let's hop over to the quote of the week. And I had one that was funny about this book. It's almost like an endorsement from Dan Quayle. It says, "It's a very good historical book about history." And I don't know if that's a real quote or not, or if that's something that got on there because someone playing him on Saturday Night Live said it. But it was just funny as I was looking for quotes about history. That one came up. It's a really good historical book about history. Just made me laugh, so I thought I'd include it. But this is a real quote. "History is like a story in a way. It depends on who's telling it." And I think this is a really good point. In Spencer Klavin's most recent episode of Young Heretics, he talked a little bit about the history, about historians, about Plutarch and some of the early writers of history, and how the way that we think about history being written was sort of being developed at the time. And when you think about that, it's really interesting. When you look at historical records, or even modern records that will in the future be historical, you have to know who is writing it, who's kind of telling this, and then the people who are putting this together and telling the story now about history, what do they think about it? Because it's very easy to pick and choose what narratives you like from history. It's very easy to ignore things you don't want to cover, or focus in on things that you find the most objectionable. And so history definitely does really rely on who's telling it. That makes a very big difference in the process. And so I just wanted to share that quote and share that with you. And let's hop over to the review of the book. And so what you'll find here is, I think, ask yourself, how much about history do you know? Do you really know? Did you know about Aaron Burr's and Alexander Hamilton's firefight or duel, right? That ended up killing the first Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. Maybe you did after watching the recent play or musical, but did you know how much of a really playboy Aaron Burr was, or about the fact that he's actually John Edwards, the sinners in the hand of an angry God preacher, right? He was actually his grandnephew, great nephew. There's all sorts of incredible stories in here in this. I mean, just to give you, it goes through different eras as well. So it has, early America, Civil War, the White House, the West. So as they were doing westward expansion, and then all the way in through the 20th century. I mean, there's really interesting stuff. They talk about that duel. Thomas Jefferson spoke from the dead. It says an interest congressperson who shot somebody on the steps of Congress, pleading insanity, and whether or not that actually works. There's a lot of really interesting, things. Confederate heritage south of the border. I mean, there's just all sorts of random things that you wouldn't think of in this book, and that's what I really like about it. Is they're just like a 2-page thing that you can read really quickly. So it's a great book for learning a little bit of history when you don't have a lot of time. And I think that that's really fun. I think I've mentioned recently that I'm reading a book of American speeches, and many of the speeches are longer than the stories here. And so it's really what it is that I think a lot of these stories are just truly unbelievable, even though they are true. But some are funny, some are scandalous, some are just weird. It's just a real range of what of these stories. And so that's why I think it's just a great thing for really anyone, even people who aren't that interested in history. I think you'd find a lot of stuff here that would interest you. You don't have to read about the maneuvers of a battle in very great detail, and then the army went to this place that you don't know where that place is necessarily, and so on and so forth. It's as much of like, I do find a lot of that stuff interesting, but I know a lot of people don't. And this is a great book for people who don't necessarily generally find history interesting. And I think that these little stories aren't necessarily most important stories to know, but they are fun, and they're good ones to have for parties and stuff like that, or whatever. It's just good to have interesting stories to tell. And if you're able to take a couple of these and remember them and share them, I think that that's pretty cool. But I also think that history is important to learn. It's a part of our heritage, and it's important to know where we come from. I think, knowing history allows us to identify solutions in our current situation. If we're going to solve the problems of today with the wisdom of the past, I think we have to look into the past and see how they address problems. And there's that common saying that those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. And I think it's true. But it's in large part because those who don't study history it's not that they're being like repeating it in the sense that it just is a loop and you're going to fall into it no matter what. There's a sense that I think of pride as well that goes along with not studying history, that you think you're smarter, you think you're better, and that also can contribute to the fact that those who ignore our history are doomed to repeat it. And it offers us, I think, the knowledge that we need to make decisions about our world. And this is, I think, important because it gives us perspective on the situation we're in. How, what does this look like in the past? What other times can we compare this to? And then you can say, okay, was that worse or not as bad? Or how was that time actually? And once you have a bit more of that frame of reference, you can start to attack the problems of today. And so I think it's really important to study history, and this is a great way to get people who may not be interested in it interested, but it's also a great way to kind of broaden your knowledge of history, I think, in a lot of ways. So definitely check out The Shocking Secrets of American History by Bill Coate. And pick up your copy through my links in the show notes. That helps me out. It really does. And so just go there and buy it through those Amazon links and get started reading it. So also you can go to conversationforgeneration.com to check out more of what I've got going on. Follow me again on Twitter or on Facebook or Parler as well. I am on there, not posting there as much. And I also have a locals now, so currently it's free to get people in there. I'm just trying to build up the community there a little bit more. So as that early community starts to get built up, eventually that may not be free. So while it is, definitely head over there to my locals and check that out. And also leaving a good rating and review on the podcast, that also helps too, wherever you're listening to that. And so with that, thank you for listening to this episode of the Conversation for Our Generation. Let's get the dialogue going. Talk to you next time.